Let's get some analysis on this. Let's be in conversation now with Dr. Jean Redpath from the Omar Institute. Dr. Redpath, good afternoon. Thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Perhaps to start the conversation here, is the credibility of IDAC in tatters, or is there something left to salvage?
Well, I think we have to be very careful of saying because of, one or two instances. We could equally say the credibility of SABC is in tatters, the credibility of the Hawks is in tatters after what we've heard at the Madlanga Commission. So I think I am a little bit concerned about the focus in on IDAC. We can certainly judge a lack of judgment by certain people within the institution of IDAC, but overall, what the institution itself is something that should be protected and in fact strengthened and made stronger going forward. And for that, we may need the National Prosecuting Authority itself, of which IDAC is part, to also be strengthened.
Yeah, let's talk about IDAC as an institution, because it's relatively new in our safety and security apparatus and infrastructure in South Africa. It's meant to be the corruption-busting institution. Its track record over the last couple of years, does it prove its value as an addition to our safety and security clusters, our justice clusters, so to speak?
Well, as you correctly say, it's relatively new. The legislation creating both it and the IDAC Oversight Judge was passed in the middle of 2024, just before the election. And prior to that, it operated as a temporary structure with, if I recall correctly, something like 30 people. And so up until 2024, it really did not have the kind of resources and capacitation to allow it to really address the problems that we face with corruption in our country. The way the mandate is structured, it also does not exclude other institutions in the South African context from pursuing these cases. So it's an interesting situation that so much pressure is coming on IDAC now, approximately 6 years into its existence, if you include the temporary time, which is about the same length of time that the Scorpions existed, before a great deal of pressure came on to the Scorpions and a great deal of criticism of the Scorpions. Now, the IDAC judge, which we're going to hear about today, was precisely created in order to address the concerns that were raised around the Scorpions and have now been raised around IDAC, which is around abuse of power or targeted investigations that seem to be targeted on people rather than based on real evidence. Now, unfortunately, although the legislation was passed in 2024, the IDAC judge office hasn't yet been put into place. And one really wonders if things might have been different had the institution been brought into being more quickly after the legislation was passed. The current minister is excellent at getting things done. She only became minister late in 2024, early 2025, and she's been steadily working through a to-do list left by her predecessors. And we can see this is one of her successes in moving things forward. Having said that, it really is of concern that the Department of Justice took so long to get this office up and running, and they're even calling it a soft launch, which means that it's not, fully operationalized.
Yeah, I want to put a pin in that, because I do want us to speak about what that oversight office ought to look like at full maximum capacity and once it has momentum. But just again to focus on IDAC and its, what it has proven in its infancy. There's been, at least over the last couple of months, a public tussle between IDAC on the one hand and SABC and/or the Hawks on the other hand over case jurisdiction, who a particular matter belongs to, and what the investigative limitations and the demarcation of each institution is to a particular case where there are overlaps. Have we seen a duplication of resources, efforts between IDAC and other justice cluster institutions, such as the Hawks and SABC on the other hand? And are there ways that could be resolved without it playing out publicly?
Yeah, well, there was supposed to be a structure which was created where these kinds of things would be ironed out between the institutions. But what seems to me to be absolutely obvious is it is usually not a good idea for an institution to investigate itself. So if the Hawks are implicated in something, it would be unwise to have the Hawks themselves investigate that case. And so one of the strengths of the situation of having more than one institution is having this ability for the appropriate person to be assigned. Now, there was supposed to be a clearinghouse type structure between the Hawks and between the NPA, in fact, not just IDAC, because we have to remember that IDAC falls under the National Prosecuting Authority. And in the time of Bulelani Ngcuka, he was the face both of the Scorpions and of the National Prosecuting Authority. In this era, the focus is much more on Andrea Johnson rather than the head of the NPA, and I'm not sure what is the reason for that. To return, there is a clearinghouse structure. They have reported to Parliament on how this operates. So it seems that something has gone wrong with how that structure operates over the last few years.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit now about the Oversight Office. At full maximum capacity, what is it meant to look like, Dr. Redpath?
Well, that's not clear from the legislation and the regulations. The legislation simply says must have sufficient capacity to deal with the issues. Now, IDAC is a very small institution compared to crime intelligence or the Hawks. It's really only a couple of hundred people. And so you don't really need a very big office to oversee the investigations and the work of IDAC. So it ends up being a relatively small office. What you do need is a very clear-headed judge who will look at the evidence with a clear eye and with a very clear understanding of the legislation and of the law. And hopefully Judge Raulinga is that person. He's well respected. So that is the most important, that there is a judge there. And then you would also need some support in terms of some investigators.
Let's speak about Judge Raulinga for a minute. I've got in front of me, Dr. Redpath, a letter written by the MK party to the Speaker of Parliament just today, and they're objecting to the appointment of Dr. Raulinga as the head of this oversight function. And the reason they cite for it is that Dr. Raulinga, at a time when he appeared before the Judicial Services Commission, had disclosed that he has a close friendship with what was then Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa, now President Cyril Ramaphosa. They've been friends at the time for more than 4 decades, 40 years plus. He had disclosed before this commission. The MK party say they object to his appointment on the basis that IDAC exists to pursue politically sensitive corruption cases, and several of which touch the ANC and its senior figures directly. I quote from the letter. They go on to say the Ombud's task is to independently investigate IDAC's own officials when they are accused of abuse of power or improper conduct, including conduct that may implicate politically connected individuals. Are you worried at all about the sensitivity around conflict as far as Dr. Raulinga might be concerned?
Well, if Raulinga can be a judge, then he can also take on this position. So if MK wishes to allege that he cannot or should not have been a judge, then let's bring the evidence to show that. What the office of the IDAC judge is going to do is deal with complaints about the acts of investigators and the acts of IDAC. So if complaints come in, there's no reason to suggest that he will, not deal with those in terms of the law. It will also be dealt with transparently and in the public domain. So it's really, I do not think that MK's concern holds a lot of water unless were able to show actual evidence that would disqualify him from being a judge.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there for now, Dr. Redpath. Really do appreciate you sharing your insights on this.